The neighbors laughed when he tied down the house roof, but the reason... That day the whole street stopped to watch. Some went to the window. Others stepped right out onto the sidewalk, coffee in hand, as if it were a show. And in a way it was, but not the way they imagined. A man in a blue coat bent over the snow, pulling thick ropes with gloved hands, tying each one to the roof of the old wooden cabin as if the house might run away come daybreak. The ropes ran down from the roof edges to stakes driven into the frozen ground, one after another, row after row of them, as if someone had put the house on a leash. And Arthur didn't even lift his head. He pulled, tested the tension, adjusted, moved on to the next hook, pulled, tested, adjusted. It was Mrs. Beatrice who got things started, 72 years old, with a voice that isn't afraid of being heard. She was at the gate with her niece when she pointed and said, loud and clear, "Look at that. The man has finally lost his mind." Her niece laughed, embarrassed. 2 or 3 neighbors nearby laughed too. Someone shouted from a distance that it looked like a crazy person's house. Another said that at that rate, the roof would fly off along with the ropes. The joke made its way around the neighborhood all afternoon. Arthur heard it. Of course he heard it. But he didn't stop. That detail has always impressed me about certain people, the ability to keep going when the whole world is laughing. It's not empty stubbornness. There's something inside holding them up, something outsiders can't see. And what was inside Arthur that day was a long story. A story that began long before the ropes, long before the laughter, with roots sunk deep in a past he carried with every step he took over that snow. The wooden cabin was about 50 years old. Old on purpose. The wood darkened by time, the thick walls keeping the cold outside and the warmth inside. His father had built it with his own hands, back when that small mountain town was still barely a handful of houses scattered across the countryside. Arthur had grown up inside those walls, had brought Martha to see the cabin before he even asked her to marry him. He remembered that day like it was yesterday. She looked at the glowing windows, the smoke rising from the chimney, and said that house had a soul. He agreed on the spot, still agreed decades later. Martha had passed 2 winters ago. He didn't even like to put it into words. He'd say she went first. That's just how things sometimes happen, that she was at peace. But the cabin stayed, and it stayed the same. The wooden bench she loved to sit on when the morning sun came through. The clothesline where she hung her embroidered quilts. The kitchen window that would stick when it got too cold, and she would unlatch with a touch, like someone who knows every way the house has of testing your patience. Arthur didn't touch a thing, didn't move anything out of place, and that's why he found out about the problem too late. The roof was giving way. Not suddenly, not all at once. Slowly, the way old things surrender without warning. The beams supporting the ridgepole had worked for years under the weight of snow piled up every winter, and one of them had started to crack. A closer neighbor, Mr. Otis, had gone up to help Arthur clear the snow off the roof one Sunday and noticed it. "Arthur, this thing is compromised. You need to call someone who knows what they're doing." Arthur did. The inspector came, knocked, measured, looked with that look of someone about to deliver bad news. He said the sidewalls were starting to spread from the pressure of the roof, that without reinforcement, in another season or 2 of heavy snow, the structure would give out. And then came the part Arthur wasn't expecting. The ideal solution would be to demolish and rebuild, Mr. Arthur. The wood is too far gone in the center. Demolish. Arthur stayed so quiet for so long that the inspector asked if he was all right. He was. He was just processing what that word meant, in a context the inspector didn't understand, and he wasn't going to explain right there, at that moment. Because demolishing the cabin wasn't demolishing a structure. It was demolishing the only place where Arthur could still feel that everything made sense. It was demolishing the only thing that tied the past to the present, in a physical, real way that he could touch with his hands. And more than all of that, it was demolishing the only thing Caleb would still recognize if he came back. Caleb, the son. 38 years old. The last time Arthur had seen his son's face in person had been 7 years ago during an argument that started small and grew, until it became something neither of them knew how to stop in time. The right words said in the wrongest way possible. Arthur had said his son was ungrateful. Caleb had said his father never knew how to listen. The two of them had stood at the cabin door, with the snow outside and the silence inside, and neither of them had taken the step that would have changed everything. Caleb left, and didn't come back. Martha had tried. She called her son every week, talked, sent messages, asked for patience on both sides. She was the thread that held the family together as a family. When she passed, the thread came undone. Arthur tried calling his son a few times after that, but his voice came out different, dry, awkward, and the conversations ended before they got anywhere. Caleb sent a short message on his father's birthday. Arthur replied. That was what there was. But there was a detail Arthur still hadn't been able to bring up in those quick, cold conversations, a detail he needed to tell his son in person. Martha had left a letter for Caleb, kept inside the drawer of the old dresser that was in their room. A letter she wrote when she realized time was getting shorter and that she might not have another chance to say certain things with her own voice. She had asked Arthur, "When he comes, you give it to him. Don't send it through the post office. You hand it to him personally. When he comes." She had said it like that, with that silent faith she had in everything. Arthur had promised. So when the inspector said, "Demolish," what Arthur heard was, "Your promise goes away along with it," because Caleb would only come back to that cabin. That he knew. His son had grown up there. Those walls held something in him too, even if he wouldn't admit it. If the cabin disappeared, the reason to come back disappeared along with it. And Martha's letter would stay in an envelope that would never reach the right hands, in a room that would no longer exist. Arthur didn't sleep that night. He stayed at the kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling in front of him, staring at the ceiling, thinking. Early in the morning, he called the only engineer whose number he still kept in his memory, a man named Mr. Sterling, 71 years old, retired for a decade, who had worked his whole life with old buildings in that region. He wasn't an official inspector, didn't have an active license anymore, but he had something better. Decades of experience with old wooden houses that everyone wanted to throw away, and he stubbornly insisted on saving. Mr. Sterling came the next day. He looked at the cabin from the outside, went in, knocked on the beams, stayed silent for a long time. Then he sat in the chair that was Martha's chair, which Arthur found strange, but said nothing. "It can be saved," Mr. Sterling said. Arthur felt his chest open up. "But you're going to have to do something that will look strange to anyone looking from the outside." "Go ahead and explain," Mr. Sterling explained. The problem was that the walls were being pushed outward by the pressure of the roof. The weight of the snow pressed from above, the ridge beam distributed that force to the sides, and the sides were giving way. The conventional solution would be a heavy renovation from the inside, but there was another solution, an older one, that builders of long ago used in cabins exactly like this: cables and thick ropes, anchored to the ground with iron stakes, pulling the walls back inward. It wasn't pretty, it was functional, and it worked if done right. "You're going to need to put at least 20 ropes," said Mr. Sterling, "one every 40 centimeters along both sides. It'll look like you tied the house down." "I'll look crazy." Mr. Sterling gave a short smile. "You will. But the house will stay standing." Arthur went to buy the materials the next day. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and above all, subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. And that was how that scene took over the street. Arthur in his blue coat bent over the snow, hands firm on the ropes, breath steaming in the cold air, while the neighbors laughed and he didn't stop. The problem is that Mrs. Beatrice didn't stop at laughing. 2 days after Arthur started the work, she went to the Homeowners Association with a list of signatures. She said it was a danger, that the ropes ran across part of the ground where people passed, that the cabin was threatening to collapse, and that someone needed to take action. She had gotten 8 signatures. 8. In a neighborhood of 40 families, 8 people had signed something against a man who only wanted to save his own home. Arthur found out through Mr. Otis, who went to the cabin with a grim face and the news on the tip of his tongue. "You need to defend yourself, Arthur. There's a meeting on Thursday." Arthur didn't go to the meeting on Thursday. Not because he didn't want to. It was because on Wednesday night the phone rang with a number he didn't expect. It was Caleb's wife. Her name was Brooke. Arthur had seen her face in a photo, never in person. They had married in a simple ceremony in another city, when the relationship between father and son was already broken. Arthur hadn't even been invited. Martha had been, but she went and didn't share details. She just said everything was fine, and that one day it would all work itself out. Brooke's voice on the phone was calm but heavy. She said she knew they had never spoken before, that she understood if he wanted to hang up, but she needed to tell him something. Caleb was not well, not sick in his body, sick on the inside the way a person gets when something doesn't add up. He'd been having trouble sleeping for weeks, withdrawn, pacing in circles inside the house. Brooke thought he needed to go see his father. She thought there was unfinished business between the two that Caleb had never managed to resolve. "He knows she's gone," said Brooke, referring to Martha. "But he didn't go to the funeral, and that weighs on him. It's weighing more and more." Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell him the house is still standing, that I'm here." Brooke was quiet for a while too. Then she said she would tell him. Now, this moment right here, I had to stop for a second before continuing to read. Because there are things you say as simply as that. The house is still standing, I'm here. And behind those words an entire life fits. The following days were heavy in a different way. Arthur went to the meeting late. He had missed Thursday, but he showed up on Saturday when the matter was taken up again. He walked into the room with Mr. I. Sterling at his side, who had agreed to come without Arthur needing to ask twice. The old engineer calmly explained the technique, showed photos of other cabins where the method had been used, and let people ask questions. Mrs. Beatrice stood with her arms crossed through much of the explanation, but when Mr. Sterling finished and asked if anyone had any real technical questions, she remained silent. The list of signatures came to nothing, but the look on Mrs. Beatrice's face as Arthur left the meeting said this wasn't over, and it wasn't. 3 days later, someone cut 2 of the ropes on the left side of the cabin during the night. Arthur woke up in the morning and went to check the tension like he did every day, and found the ropes loose, the stakes still in the ground but the cables cut clean at the knot, done with some kind of knife or pruning shears, flush. That was different from laughing in the street. That was an act. Arthur stood looking at those cut ropes for a long time, the cold biting his face, and felt something he rarely felt, clean anger. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that hardens. He didn't go talk to anyone, didn't accuse anyone. He bought new ropes and redid them both the same day. But Riley had seen it. Riley was 29, lived with her grandmother 2 houses down, and had that way of showing up at the right moment without making a fuss. She had stayed up late studying and seen a silhouette through the fogged glass of the window. She couldn't make out who it was, but the next morning when she saw Arthur fixing the ropes, she went up to him. "I saw someone out there in the middle of the night," she said quietly. Arthur looked at her. "Don't do anything with that." "But don't do anything." He said it again, softer this time. "If I react the wrong way now, I lose what matters, and what matters isn't the rope." Riley didn't ask what mattered was, but she stayed there helping retie the knots for an hour, without saying much, which is sometimes exactly what a person needs. In the following days, she started checking the ropes in the morning before Arthur woke up, just a quick look. She never told him about it. He found out weeks later when she slipped in the snow and he saw the footprints going from her grandmother's door toward the cabin too early in the day. The week went by. Arthur noticed the laughter had died down. It hadn't stopped entirely. Mrs. Beatrice still commented out loud when she passed by on the street, but most people had already gotten used to the sight of the ropes. Some looked at them differently now, like someone who realizes they maybe didn't understand everything. Mr. Otis came by one afternoon for coffee and asked directly, "You're waiting for Caleb?" It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. Arthur set his cup down on the saucer slowly. "I am." "And if he doesn't come?" Arthur took his time answering. "He'll come. His mother trusted that. I'm not going to be the one who proves her wrong." Mr. Otis was quiet. Then he picked his cup back up and drank the rest of his coffee, like someone closing a subject that didn't need any more words. "Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now continuing. It had been 3 weeks since the ropes went up when Caleb arrived. He hadn't warned anyone. Arthur was outside at the end of the afternoon checking the stakes when he heard a car stop on the street. He looked up and recognized his son before even seeing his face, by the posture, by the way he got out of the car, by the way he stood there looking. Caleb was 38 but looked more tired than that, older in the eyes. He had a small backpack and an expression Arthur couldn't quite read. The two of them stood looking at each other for a few seconds that felt longer than they were. Then Caleb looked at the ropes, looked at the cabin, looked at his father again. "What happened here?" Arthur tucked his gloves into the pocket of his blue jacket. "The roof needed reinforcing." Caleb approached slowly, looking at the rows of ropes anchored to the ground, the iron stakes, the snow-covered roof with the darkened wood behind it, and the windows lit from inside with that warm light it always had. He ran his hand along one of the ropes, felt the tension. "Works like this?" "It works. It's standing. It's quiet." Caleb stood in front of the door. He didn't go in right away. Arthur noticed his son was having trouble crossing that threshold, and he understood. Some doors carry a weight beyond their weight. "Can I come in?" Caleb asked, and the question was so small and so big at the same time that Arthur had to take a breath before answering. "This house is yours as much as it is mine." They walked in together. The cabin was just the same, the wooden bench in the corner, the clothesline without quilts now, but in the same place, the kitchen window that would stick in the cold. Caleb went to it by instinct, like someone making a gesture the body had memorized, and unlatched it with the same touch his mother used. He opened it a millimeter and closed it again. He stood with his back turned for a moment. Arthur went to the dresser, opened the drawer, took out the envelope. When he turned around, Caleb was already looking at him. He had seen the movement. He knew what it was before Arthur even said anything, perhaps because deep down he hoped something like that existed, some final words his mother had left behind. "She asked me to deliver it in person," Arthur said. "She said that when you came I should put it in your hands." Caleb paused for a moment, before taking the 3 steps that separated them and picking up the envelope. His hands were trembling slightly. Or maybe it was the cold that still lingered in his coat. Arthur preferred to believe it was the cold. His son sat on the wooden bench that was Martha's and held the envelope in his lap for a few minutes before opening it. Arthur went to the kitchen, put water on to boil, stood with his back turned to give him space, hearing only the wind outside and the silence inside. When the tea was ready and Arthur came back with the 2 cups, Caleb had read the letter. The pages were folded back into the envelope in his hand, and his son's face had that expression of someone who had cried without knowing exactly when it started. Arthur placed the cup on the table beside him and sat in the chair across. Neither of them spoke for a while. It was a silence different from the one 7 years earlier, not the silence of the fight that was never resolved, but the silence of 2 people who were finally in the same place without needing to prove anything. It was Caleb who spoke first. He said she wrote just like she talked, that you could hear her voice in the sentences, that she had asked him not to waste what he still had of a father, that she knew the 2 of them were too alike, and that people who are alike fight for crooked reasons, and that didn't have to be the end of anything. Arthur listened. Then he said, in that voice that chooses words with care, "I said you were ungrateful. It wasn't true. I was angry about something else, and you took it." Caleb stayed quiet. "I should have said that before. I took too long." "I took too long too," Caleb said softly. Outside, the snow began to fall again. The light from the cabin's windows spread over the snow outside, the same way it always had, that warm orange the cold outside couldn't put out. The ropes were taut and firm, each one in its place, each stake driven deep enough to hold what needed to be held. Mrs. Beatrice passed by on the street that late afternoon and saw the second car parked. She looked at the lit windows. She looked at the ropes. She stood still for a moment, and anyone who knows certain people's faces well would have seen something there that was no longer laughter. It was the recognition of someone beginning to understand that there was more to that story than she had wanted to see. She kept walking. Riley was at her grandmother's window and saw Caleb's car too. She smiled to herself and went back to studying. Mr. Otis found out the next day and went to the cabin with a freshly baked loaf his wife had made. No explanation, just saying it was to make the coffee taste better. Arthur opened the door. Caleb was sitting at the table, and Mr. Otis shook the young man's hand with the firmness of someone who embraces without embracing. Caleb stayed 4 days. On the 3rd day, he helped his father check every single rope, testing the tension one by one, from start to finish. Arthur ran his hands along them, explaining what Mr. Sterling had taught him, how the pressure worked, where the most critical points were. Caleb listened, asked questions, understood. On the 4th day before leaving, he said he'd come back before the end of winter with a friend who knew carpentry, and that together they'd start thinking about a more permanent plan for the cabin, something that would make it last another 50 years. Arthur said it was fine the way it was. Caleb said he deserved better than fine. It was the first time in a long while that the two of them laughed together about something. On the morning of his departure, Caleb stopped at the doorstep and looked back one last time, like someone trying to memorize the moment. Arthur stood outside in the cold, wearing his blue coat, and the two of them looked at each other for a second that needed no words. Caleb left, but this time it was different. This time there was a date set for his return, and the ropes stayed there, firm in place, holding what needed to be held, while the rest of the world didn't understand why. Sometimes the most important thing a man can do isn't the most beautiful thing, nor the easiest to explain. It's the thing that keeps standing what matters, while waiting for the moment when someone finally stops laughing and starts to understand. End of story. What a story, folks, what a story. Arthur didn't need anyone's approval to know what he had to do. Sometimes you can't bear the weight of a promise made to someone you loved, and it's exactly that weight that keeps you standing. Tell us what you thought, and where you're watching from. Do you think Arthur did the right thing by waiting like that? Leave it in the comments. I read them all. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you so much for your company as always.